For 1,000 years, the Netherlands built walls to keep the ocean out. Then one day, they tore those walls down, and the whole world is copying what happened next. In this video, you're going to learn 3 things. First, how a tiny country that sits mostly below sea level built the greatest flood defense system ever made. Second, why they walked away from that strategy and made the opposite decision. And third, why countries from Thailand to the United States are now trying to copy exactly what the Dutch figured out. This is the story of a country that learned to stop fighting water and won. Here is a fact that is hard to get your head around. About 1/3 of the Netherlands sits below sea level. Some parts of it sit nearly 7 meters below the waterline. That means if you removed every dike, every dam and every pump in the country, large parts of it would simply be underwater, gone within days. The Netherlands is a country that has been fighting the ocean for over 1,000 years just to exist, and for most of that time the strategy was simple: build higher walls, dig deeper canals, drain the water, push it back, win. It worked for centuries. The Dutch were the best in the world at it. They invented systems to drain wetlands and turn them into farmland. They built windmills, not just for grain, but to pump water off the land constantly, day and night. They reclaimed hundreds of thousands of acres from the sea and called it theirs. By the 20th century, the Dutch had built a network of dikes stretching thousands of kilometers. They had drained an entire inland sea and turned it into farmland. They had pushed the North Sea back so far that cities like Amsterdam and Rotterdam, which should by any natural logic be underwater, were thriving. The Dutch didn't just survive the water, they mastered it. The whole world looked at them and said, "Those people know what they're doing." Then came the night of January 31st, 1953. 1,836 people died in a single night. Not in a war, not in an earthquake, in a flood. On the night of January 31st, 1953, a massive storm surge hit the southwestern Netherlands. High spring tides combined with a powerful northwest windstorm pushed the North Sea over and through the existing dikes. In a single night, 96 large breaches tore open across the dike system. Nearly 400 smaller ones followed. 200,000 hectares of land flooded. Over 180,000 animals drowned. More than 3,300 homes were completely destroyed, and another 43,000 were damaged, and 1,836 people lost their lives. Some towns sat flooded for 10 full months before the dikes were repaired and the water was pumped out. The Dutch had spent centuries building what they believed was an unbeatable system. One storm proved they were wrong. Within 20 days of the flood, the Dutch government created a committee with one job: make sure this never happens again. What they built next became known as the Delta Works. Over the next 4 decades, Dutch engineers sealed off entire estuaries. They built massive movable storm surge barriers. They reshaped the entire southwestern coastline, shrinking 700 kilometers of vulnerable coastline down to just 80 kilometers of hardened defense. When it was finished, the Delta Works was called the greatest engineering achievement of the 20th century. Engineers from all over the world came to study it. The Dutch had done what nobody thought was possible. They had basically won their 1,000-year war against the sea. And then the rivers started breaking things. In 1993, 250,000 people had to evacuate their homes, not because the ocean broke through, because the rivers did. Here is something most people don't know about the Netherlands. The country doesn't just face the ocean, it sits at the end of some of Europe's biggest rivers: the Rhine, the Meuse, the Waal, and the Uchsel. All of them flow through the Netherlands on their way to the North Sea. For decades, Dutch engineers had been straightening those rivers and building dikes along their banks. The idea was simple. A straight river moves water out faster. Higher dike walls keep floodwaters in. But something unintended was happening. Straightening rivers made the water move faster, which meant it scraped the riverbed harder, which meant the riverbed was sinking, in some places by as much as 2 meters. And the higher the dikes got, the more pressure built up behind them, and the more the cities and farmland behind those dikes expanded, the more people were living in places that would be catastrophically flooded if anything went wrong. The strategy that had worked for centuries was quietly setting up the conditions for a much bigger disaster. In 1993, extreme rainfall sent water levels in the Rhine and Meuse surging to record heights. Nearly 250,000 people had to leave their homes. Then it happened again in 1995. Another extreme flood, another mass evacuation. The dikes held both times, barely. But Dutch engineers looked at the numbers and understood something deeply uncomfortable. If they just kept building dikes higher and higher, the rivers would keep rising to match them. They were in an arms race with water, and water had unlimited patience. So they made a decision that sounded almost crazy. They stopped fighting. Instead of building higher walls, they started tearing them down. Not because they gave up, because they finally understood what the water actually needed. In 2006, the Dutch government launched a program called Room for the River. The idea was the opposite of everything they had done for 1,000 years. Instead of forcing the rivers into tighter and tighter channels behind higher and higher walls, they would give the rivers back the space they naturally wanted. Widen the floodplains, move dikes further back from the riverbanks, lower the riverbeds, dig flood bypass channels. In some places, actually demolish existing dikes and let the water spread across land it hadn't touched in decades. They did this at more than 34 locations across 4 rivers. The program cost €2.3 billion and took nearly 10 years to complete. And here is the part that makes this story different from every other flood protection project in the world. They didn't just make it safer, they made it beautiful. Every single one of the 34 project sites was designed with a landscape architect working alongside the civil engineers. Floodplains became nature reserves, flood bypass channels became recreational waterways. Areas that used to flood dangerously were redesigned as parks that flood gently and safely and then drain. New islands appeared in rivers, wetlands came back, wildlife returned. The Room for the River program didn't just reduce flood risk, it improved the quality of life for the people living around it. And when the floods came again, because they always come again, the measures held. The Netherlands suffered damage but no casualties. The system had been tested, and it worked. Room for the River has now been recognized as one of the most important engineering and design programs of the 21st century. Thailand studied it after its 2011 floods devastated the country. Bangladesh used its principles to redesign flood zones. Cities across the United States, including New Orleans and Houston, have sent engineers to the Netherlands to learn how to apply the same thinking to their own flood problems. The Netherlands is now preparing Room for the River 2.0, expanding the program to cover not just floods but freshwater supply, drinking water and water quality across the whole country. The Dutch approach has a name now, Building with Nature. The idea is that instead of building infrastructure that fights natural forces,
hard
you
barriers
design
under intense
infrastructure
pressure.
that works
Natural
with
floodplains
them.
safely absorb
You use
excess
the
water.
energy and movement of water to your advantage instead of spending billions trying to stop it. It is a complete reversal of how humans have managed water for thousands of years. And it started because one small country, after 1,000 years of fighting, finally asked a different question. Not, how do we stop the water? But what does the water need? The Netherlands figured out that the most powerful thing you can do with a flood is give it somewhere to go. But not every country has the luxury of space, money, or time to try that approach. Next time, the country that can't afford to give water anything. A country so poor and so flat that it floods every single year without fail. And instead of fighting the water or moving away from it, they built an entirely different kind of world inside it. Floating schools, floating hospitals, floating roads. Next time, Bangladesh. Subscribe so you don't miss it.